Hey guys, today I'm going to be showing you how to add new furniture items to Survival Game Kit V2. So in this video we're going to be adding a new tent that you can place into the world that's going to have some storage already set up for us. So I'm just going to be taking you through that process. So to get started we're going to make our tent item. So we're going to go to the blueprints, items, item list. And I'm going to create a new item. Now I have a video specifically that goes through all of this information in detail. For this video I'm going to just go through it quite quickly so we can get our 10 items set up. So the row name I'm just going to call build part underscore tent. Up here we're going to set the name to tent. I'm going to leave all of this as default apart from inventory actions. We're going to add a new action. And this is going to be place. So this means that when we right click our build part in the inventory, we can place it into the world. So I'm just going to add that in there. And then our quick use action, I'm going to set to place as well. So if our item's in the quick slot and we press that number, it will go to the place mode. Now the static mesh, I'm just going to use the bag that's included with the system, but you can use any mesh you want. This is not your build part mesh, this is the mesh of the item when it's dropped in the world. So I'm just going to use the little bag. All of this can stay the same. In the UI details, you may want to create icons for your new item. If you do, you can check out the icon maker video I have that explains more about these settings, but I'm just going to use this ammo icon because it's the first one that I saw, so I'm just going to put those in there. Next up we need to set our build part, but we haven't actually created it yet, so we're going to go ahead and do that and then we'll come back to here afterwards. So we'll just save this for now. Next we're going to go to the showcase, then the blueprints folder, and we're going to find the build parts. And in here there's a few different ways to create a new furniture build part. Now the way we're going to do it in this video is the most straightforward way because a lot of stuff's already set up for us, and it's probably going to be the easiest way for you as well. We're just going to duplicate an existing one in here. The good thing about this is we've got sort of one of every kind of build part type. So we've got the wood chest, which is storage. We've got the recipe campfire, which is crafting component. We've got the normal campfire, which is the cooking component. The bed is the respawn component. Code lock is the lock component. And then we've got a lamp as well, which can be placed on walls. So depending on what you're looking for, you can duplicate whichever one you want to do what you want to do. But for this, I'm just going to duplicate the wood chest. So we'll right click it and select duplicate. Now I'm going to call it tent. Oh, I spelled that weirdly. So we'll correct that, 10, like that. And then we'll open that up. And there's a few things we're going to set up in here. So the first thing we want to do is just double click any component to go to the viewport. And in here, we're first going to change our mesh. So I'm going to select the mesh here or in the components panel. And we're going to change the static mesh. So for me, this is the tent, like that. You can change it to whatever mesh shirt you want to. So because we duplicated the wood chest, we actually have some of the components already set up here for us. But for the sake of the video, I'm just going to delete the build collision and the ground check so we can start kind of fresh and I can explain to you what those do. So the first thing we're going to add is the ground check component. Now what this does is basically it does a trace down from its location to try and find a floor to place this build part on. And it traces down whatever this distance is set to. So by default it's 180, which is very far. I recommend changing this to something like 10. So it will check 10 centimeters down for some floor that we can place this build part on. I'm going to set, so we can have multiple ones of these. So for a bigger build part like this, you might want to have one set every corner to check that our tent isn't hanging off of something and it looks weird. So I'm going to take this one and I'm going to move it to this corner. Now because we're checking down 10 centimeters, I'm going to just move it up by 5 centimeters. That way we have about 5 centimeters where it can detect ground and allow us to place. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create 4 of these for each corner. So I'm just going to right click and duplicate. You don't have to do this. You can just have one. You may have a smaller build part and you literally just want it to have one. That's completely fine. Or you may want it to have 20 of these. It really doesn't matter. Just you can have as many as you like. So I'll duplicate this again, drag it over here. And if you want your build part to be able to be placed in the middle of the air, you can do that as well. You would just not add any of these ground check components. If you don't have any of these, you can literally place the build part in the middle of the air, and the system will allow you to. So once we've done that, we know now that our build part will check that it's definitely on the ground when we're placing it. Next, we can add our placement collision. So to do this, we're going to search, first we want to actually select our static mesh, then do box. We want to add a box collision, and with the collision selected, we search for tags, and we're going to add a new tag, and it's going to be build collision, like this. Make sure it's spelled exactly the same as I've spelled it here with capitals. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to reshape this box so it fits our build part inside of it. You actually want to make sure that it's probably a little bit smaller than your build part. This just gives you a little bit of space to play with so that you can put things next to each other and stuff like that. I'd also recommend that you keep it slightly above the floor, so you can see that mine's leaving a little bit of space here. That basically just allows for, if your floor's uneven or bumpy or has rocks on it or something, we don't really want those blocking the collision. So you want to leave a little bit of space between your collision and the floor to allow for that. We also can have multiple of these as well. So if I wanted to, I could just right click, duplicate, and I have another collision box, and I can put this wherever I want. And if something's in this box, then I won't be able to place the tent. So that's what this box is for. But you can spend as long as you like getting this to be super precise. I'm just going to stick with this for now, and then we can compile and save this. Next, I'm going to quickly go over our master inventory information over here. So we're just going to select the component, and then in here we've got some of its settings. So first you can see its container settings here. You can set the container name. So this is a name that the player sees when it interacts with this tent. You can set the container, how many slots the container has. You can set weight limits, restrictions. I actually have a video called container items where I go over all of these in way more detail, so you can check that out. But here is where you would change your storage settings for your tent. Down here you can actually enable use destruction bag. What happens with this is, if it's true, when this tent's destroyed, if it has items inside of it, it will spawn a little bag, and the items will be inside that bag. Just looking around to see if there's any other settings that you'll want to change. You have the random item spawning settings, so I will have a separate video on this. They're fairly self-explanatory. You can just enable random item spawning, so random items will appear in its inventory. That's where you would do these settings. But past that, that's pretty much all of the settings for that. So this is where you would set that up. So now we're ready to create our build part in the build part list, which we'll do now. So now we're going to go to the build part list. So blueprints, we'll search for build part, and we want to go to the build part list, and we're going to create a new build part, and it's going to be called tent. And we're just going to fill out the information here quickly. So the name will be tent. I'm going to leave description as blank because we don't really need it for this. Now our type must be set to furniture. This is really important. Then we can set the build part's max health, whether or not it can take damage, if it requires a grid or not. Because this is furniture, I would recommend keeping this disabled. You basically make the build part ignore the floor collision. Usually you shouldn't need to have this on, but if you're having some problems with your ground causing collision, blocking the placement, you can try enabling this. You can enable whether or not the build part can rotate. There's an arrow, a rotation arrow that points towards the front of the mesh, so players can see which direction they're placing it in. You can enable that here. you can set how much the build part is rotated by here. Blueprint class we're actually going to set to our tent, so we'll set that to tent. I'm actually going to enable rotation as well. Then we have item cost and override item cost. Now here, what I recommend doing is, if you want your tent to say cost, I don't know, 10 fabric and 5 rocks, then I would recommend adding that to the item cost. But if you have an item tent, a tent item like we just created in the item list, I'd recommend adding that to the override item cost. So they're kind of the differences. So because we're using a tent item, I'm going to add that to the tent item cost. You can have both set as well. That's completely up to you. But just for this, I'm just going to use the tent item we created. So we're going to search for my master item list, and we'll set this to tent like that. And we only want it to use 1, so I'm just going to leave the amount to 1. Build menu icon on. This is for the radial build menu. I have a separate video on that, so you can check that out, and it will explain this. Very quickly, allow repair is whether or not it can be repaired. You can set what items it costs to repair it. You can set what build part it will upgrade to if you choose to upgrade it. You can choose whether or not the build part can be picked up with this option, and what items the player will receive when they do pick it up. Hitbox type is used to, basically in weapons you can set a certain amount of damage for each hitbox, and then in here you can set what hitbox this build part uses. We're just going to leave it as none. That's fine, it'll just use the weapon's default damage. Then you can enable height adjust, so if you play with the foundations, you can press E and Q to raise or lower it. So these are those settings. Show name panel should only be true for respawn points like the bed. For everything else, you want to leave this unchecked. And then these two settings here are used for if you're placing on walls, like the lamp. I'll explain a little bit more about those after we've set up our tent, so we'll come back to that. But overall, we're all set up and ready for our tent here, so I'm just going to save this. Next, we're just going to go back to the item list, and we actually need to set in our build part details the new tent we just created. So we'll search for tent, and we'll select that, and then we can save this. Now we just need to create a world item for our tent. So we'll go to the items, we want to go to our world items, and I'm just going to duplicate the apple because it doesn't really matter, and I'll just rename this to tent, and we'll open that up, and we'll change the row name to tent like that, and we can compile and save this. And now we can drag our tent item into the world like that, and it's ready to pick up. So before we jump in to test our tent, there are a couple of other things I want to mention. The first thing is, because we duplicated the wood chest, if we jump back to our tent build part, there's a few things left in here that are meant for the chest and we don't want for our tent. So the first thing is going to be in the event graph. We've got this effects folder, and if we open it up, this is basically set to when the player interacts with the build part, it's going to switch to the opened chest mesh. Now I don't have like an open version of the tent, so I'm not going to use this, but if you have like an open version of your build part, you could set this in here if you wanted to, but for the sake of this video, I'm just going to highlight and delete this. If you duplicated the furnace or the campfire or anything like that, you may or may have the same thing. Those are set up because they have sound and particle effects, so it may vary. It's just something to be aware of. Because you're duplicating an existing one, there may be some existing code that you need to remove or change. And then the last thing is, in the functions over here in interaction, there's one called end interaction. We'll open this up, and this is basically where it tells it to switch to the closed version of the wood chest. Again, I don't have a closed or open tent version, so I'm just going to delete this, but if you wanted to, you would set your closed tent mesh in here if you wanted to. But I'm just going to delete that and connect it up, and compile and save this now. Now there's one last thing I want to show you before we jump in and test our tent, and that's our interaction settings down here. So under interfaces in interaction, you'll find the interact name. If we right click, we can implement function. And in here, we can set the build part name, which we'll see when you look at an object that's interactable, you get the little name above your crosshair. This is the name that will be there. So I'm going to set mine to tent, and I'll show you what I mean in game. And then lastly, we've got possible actions, which we can right click and implement functions. I have a separate video on the interaction system where I go a lot more into detail about this, so you can check that out if you want more info. But just for this video, I'll show you how you can set up your own text for the options that the player has when they look at our tent. So I'm going to drag out from here and do make to make an array. Then we'll do it again. We'll search make and make a world action. And here we're going to set the action to open. And then our action text in here is the text that we'll see in that little menu. So I'm going to set mine to open tent, for example. You can put whatever you like, but mine's open tent. And then we can compile and save this and test this out in game. So we're going to jump into game and test everything out. So I'll pick up my tent. We'll drag it to the quick slot, and you can see we can place it in the world. I can't place it inside of stuff, and I can't place it in the air because of our ground check components. And if I place it, you can see it says tent up the top and then open tent below. So those are the two text we just set inside the tent. We can open up the tent. We have our storage. If you want to change the storage container name, you can do that by selecting the master inventory, and you can find that setting over here. Obviously you can't be doing it when in game. So that's pretty much it for setting up your new build part. I'll quickly go and explain a little bit about placing against walls like the lamp does that's included. So we'll jump into the blueprints, build part list, furniture, and then lamp. This is only if you're interested in doing these build parts against walls. If you're not, then you can probably just close the video now. But very quickly, if we open up the lamp, you can see it's actually orientated in this direction, so it's kind of rotated 90 degrees. This is needed for if you're doing a build part that's being placed against a wall. Also, with the build part collision, remember that we don't want it to. This surface is the one that's going to be against the wall, so we don't want our build part collision to be right against this. We want it slightly above where we're touching a wall. This is really important because otherwise it will think that it's colliding with the wall and we won't be able to place. So that's something to keep in mind. Lastly, we've got the ground check component. Now, because the lantern can change its orientation, we actually have an option in here called trace down. Now, for most build parts, this is enabled, but for our lantern, we've actually disabled it, so it can trace in different directions depending on the rotation of the lantern. And then we've still got the same setting for ground trace distance, and you can actually enable the visibility of the trace, so you can see what direction it's going. And if it's going the wrong direction, say the trace was going upwards like over here, instead of tracing downwards searching for the wall, you can just go in and you can rotate it like anything else. What I'll do is I'll make this a little bit further so we can see it easily in game. So I'll set this to 15. If we jump in game, I'll quickly show you what I mean. So we'll find, I need a backpack first, so we'll equip this, and we'll find the lamp. And if I try and place it, you can see we've got this little line. Now you can see right now it's pointing downwards. If I hit F1, you can see it's pointing downwards, but if I hit it against the wall, you can see it's now pointing against the wall, and it's hitting the wall, so it knows that we can place here. And you can see it changes direction depending on our build part. So that's what it means when the trace down is disabled. So that's an important part of these kinds of build parts. If you are looking to add one of these, I would recommend starting with the lamp because it's already kind of set up in a way to do this sort of thing. And lastly, in your build part list, if you find the lamp, you'll see the use hit surface rotation. You want this enabled for it to work like the lamp does, where it changes its rotation depending on the surface's rotation, and that's what gives us that cool effect where we can put the lantern, at any rotation we want. So that's pretty much it for placing against walls and for this video. So thank you for watching.